To Crosstalk Media coverage of Sochi, I'm joined by my guest, Martin Andrews. He is RT's correspondent in Sochi right now. In London, we have John Goodbody. He is a journalist for the Sunday Times who has been covering the Olympics since 1968. And in Washington, we cross to Lee Camp. He is a comedian and an author. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules. In effect, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Martin, you're in Sochi right now. You've been there since the start here. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. What's it like? And I know you were aware of what was being said about the games weeks and months before they opened up. So please compare to me what you read in Western media and what you've experienced to date in Sochi. Go ahead.
Wow. Well, as you can see, we've got the Olympic Park behind us at the moment, and just behind you, I don't think it's in vision, you can see the Olympic flame, or you can't see the Olympic flame, but the entire park is on fire. Sochi is on fire at the moment. The atmosphere is just incredible. And don't take my word for it. Every single person I've asked from all around the world who is witnessing this sensational sporting event really says it's one of the best Olympics they've ever had. In answer to your question regarding the media and the portrayal of this Olympic mess, shambles, ridicule, I think it's personally horrific. And the answer to that is that, in my opinion, it's just the old Cold War mentality of, you know, going back centuries ago, decades ago. I get a taxi to Heathrow Airport, and the taxi guy, as they do, they say to me, "Oh, where are you off to on holiday or on work?" And the minute I say Moscow, the minute that I say Russia, they say they have to apologize for it. It has a negative attitude in the West, and hopefully that the thousands and thousands of people who are here, they've realized that Sochi is a beautiful place. The money, you can see it in the facilities, in the mountain cluster, in the transport that they've built here. Of course, there's going to be issues with new hotels that haven't been built. That happens in every single Olympics. It happens in every single city centre. Of course, there's going to be problems with brown water. It happens every single place. But the Western media has gone on about certain events like it's never happened before, and it's a simple attack on Russia from the West.
All right, Lee, if I can go to you in Washington, you know, if you've been watching TV for the last week or so with the sound down, you'd think this is about some kind of toilet exhibition.
Yeah, you absolutely would. I mean, I've been blown away, and I'm pretty cynical, and yet I've been blown away with the coverage of every toilet, every, you know, you've got to consider that in the Olympics, there's a 15-year-old girl who's flying through the air doing triple backflips and landing on ice, and meanwhile, they're talking about the thread count of her bed, the sheets on her bed. It's amazing. And what's interesting is the corporate media is generally, over here in the U.S., is generally about ratings. It's all about ratings, celebrity crap, and fear stories. But in this rare case, it's not about ratings. No one wants to click on a story about a toilet, but clearly there's some other, you know, dynamic, which I think Martin talked about quite well.
Okay, John, I'm very pleased to have you on this program because you have a great sense of perspective. You've been covering the Olympics since 1968 in Mexico City. How different in your mind, or not different in your mind, is the coverage of the Olympic Games in Russia, in Sochi this year, from other Olympics that you've covered in your career?
Well, I wouldn't have said that these games now are any different from any previous games, in the sense that now the concentration is on the sport. There's been very little about any political element or impinging on these Olympic Games. Before the Games started, there were, you know, criticisms, as you know, about human rights and about gay rights. And this is not uncommon. I mean, I go back, say, to 1968, and the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. Before the Games, 55 people were killed in a massacre by the police in the center of Mexico City, and that number is the official number. Most people actually think 300 people were killed, actually students rioting before, protesting before the Olympic Games opened in Mexico City. And then, of course, in 1972, 4 years later, we had the attack by the Palestinians on the Israeli team. So there's been quite a lot of politicization of the Olympic Games in the past.
These are things that happened during it, okay? And, you know, what I'm concerned about was all the fear-mongering that was preceded the Games. Martin, if I can go to you, I've been told, and I'm so pleased to have you on the program because I want an eyewitness to tell me what's going on. I mean, the security is tight there. Is it obvious?
The security is obvious, but it's really like going through the smoothest airport in the world. If only they were like that in reality. I think the difference here is the crowd control. The fact that in an airport you'd have 6 to 9 possible scanning machines in teams. Here you've got 26 to 29 machines with not just sort of 3 or 4 staff on each machine, but sort of you're talking about 10 or 15. They've really thought about the numbers that are coming through here. And it's really quite simple. You go through the scanning machines and your bags are searched and you're heavily patted down whether you sound the alarm off or not in every single venue you go to, every single transport you go to, and the police are scattered around the area, but it hasn't got that sort of
have you heard complaints?
It feels
Are people
safe.
complaining about it? Do people complain about this? It sounds very, you know, very official.
Peter, nobody has complained about it. Everybody has said the security is faultless here. It really is.
Okay. Lee, if I can read
what
to
are you doing for toothpaste?
Okay. Well, nobody has toothpaste, okay? We'll keep that in mind here. Lee, I was going to go to you in Washington. A day or so ago in the British media, in the Mail Online, there was an article by a gentleman, Dominique Sandbrook, and the title of the article is really quite long, and it's quite astounding. The Gangsters' Games. By endorsing Putin's murderous and corrupt regime, the Olympic movement has allowed itself to be hijacked by evil, as it once was by Hitler. This is extraordinary. I have to disagree with John. I've never heard anything. Even I'm a child of the Cold War. I never heard that during the Cold War when we're looking at Olympic Games, okay? We're not looking about a conflict or proxy conflict in the third world. We're talking about a sporting event. I've never heard the level of, or the low level of journalism describe a sporting event. I find it astounding.
I was just going to say, we love to compare things to Hitler. I think Miley Cyrus was compared to him recently, but that's pretty much our go-to simile right there. But yeah, I mean, I think those things need to be talked about. Human rights abuses definitely need to be talked about, but they also, I feel like there is a double standard where when the Olympics was in the U.S., there wasn't much on the media about us blowing up kids in Afghanistan. So I don't, the double standard is what pisses me off.
Okay, John in London, you want to jump in there? Please do.
Yes, I mean, if it's the Dominic Sandbrook that I know, it's the Dominic Sandbrook who's a leading British historian and who is a historian who particularly concentrates on the post-Second World War in Britain and in Europe. But just going back to the point that these games have been particularly politicized, if you like, before the games started, I wouldn't have said that was true at all. I mean, don't forget, we had huge criticism of Moscow in the 1980 Olympics, and there was criticism of Los Angeles at the 1984 Olympics. There was in
yeah, but you know, but John, you know, one could easily say is that the United States and the Soviet Union were in a conflict. Okay, they're not in one today.
Yes, well, take the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. There were huge criticisms of Montreal with the amount of money being spent to start with. And then beforehand, we had a huge issue of black African nations walking out of the Games because of the presence of the New Zealand team. And the New Zealand team were there competing in the Games. And the reason why the black African nations boycotted those games was quite simple, was because the New Zealand rugby team had played against South Africa the previous year.
Yeah,
so
but that has nothing. But that has nothing to do with the host country. That has nothing to do with the host country. The criticism in this case is the host country. Martin, jump in.
Well, I just think the two words mentioned before, double standards, that's absolutely what it is. You know, you could talk about the West. We buy smartphones with what you could call, you know, work slavery in China. We've got clothes that we wear in high streets that are made by people in Bangladesh that earn sort of like $1 a week. You know, we've got human rights issues every single where, you know, in the West. And all my friends on social media, they've condemned me for being here in Sochi. How dare I support, you know, the Nazi evil leader? You know, it's really just got out of hand, and people actually forget the reality of their own countries. It's just hypocrisy at the highest level.
Lee, how do you?
And over here watching it in the U.S., it's been interesting how it is so one-sided. It's not that the politicism is covered with the sports. Up until the Olympics started, it was nothing but toilets, walls, beds, you know, toothpaste bombs, demonstrations of how toothpaste could blow up a car.
Again in Sochi.
Okay, jump in, Martin, before we go to the break. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of those photographs are not even from Sochi. They're from social media, from the internet, from different places around the world, or from a hotel in Russia about 10 years ago, just so you know.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Sochi. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the media coverage of the Sochi Games. Okay, I'd like to go back to Martin in Sochi. Martin, you're a gay man. You're open about it. There are other members of the RT team in Sochi that are also gay. Can you tell me the reception you've gotten from the city? Because you've been there before the Olympics opened. You saw the venue. You went to the city. You met the people. Any horror stories? Anything you want to share with our viewers here? Wow. Because for some people, that's the only thing this is about. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, it's not about that. This Winter Olympics is about sporting events. There, I said it. Also, what I'm about to talk to you and discuss with you, I do not defend any of the Russian government, and also I do not agree with this law that has been brought in. That said, people abroad, especially in America and the UK, they don't understand how laws work or do not work here in Russia. If I was not happy living in Russia, Peter, I wouldn't live here. It's as simple as that. And actually, I feel safer walking the streets of Sochi and Moscow. I've traveled to 75 cities in Russia. I've experienced it from 1-star to 5-star. I know what it's like. I've been to clubs, you name it, I've experienced it. There's a club here in Sochi called Mayaka Gay Club. It's been here for over 30 years. It proves and shows, even though you can't sort of see a club or, you know, a night venue as a benchmark of acceptance, it shows you the bubbling and thriving subculture that the gay people have here in Russia. Just like, and this is very important, just like they had in the US and the UK many years ago. And also, it's very important to mention Section 28, which everybody's been talking about, of course, in comparison, which Thatcher brought in 1988. Even though that was still in force and even in power, the gay culture became the mainstream what it is today. It's a very complicated, you know, subject regarding the hold that the Orthodox Church has over society here. At the same time, people have to think of what Russia is, where it's come from. It's new. Places need time, they need patience, and they need understanding. What works in one country doesn't work in another yet. And preaching about it, shouting about it, saying that you want boycotts for some Winter Olympics is not the way to go about it. It's time, understanding, nurture, and education.
You know, John, can remind all of us about the games in Salt Lake City. I mean, Utah is not a state well known in the United States for acceptance of homosexuality and alternative lifestyles. But I don't remember the criticism.
No, but the criticism has been particularly prevalent now, I think, because, you know, we are 10 years further down the line, 12 years further down the line than the 2002 Games in Salt Lake City. And the issue is one that, you know, it was an issue before the Games started, but subsequently, since the Games opened last Friday, there's been hardly any. Well, I read the 2 or 3 newspapers in Britain every day. There's hardly been a thing in the newspapers at all. It's been solely concentrating on the sport at the Olympic Games. Before the Games, there certainly were issues, but I think that, you know, goes with the territory and when you're staging an Olympic Games. All sorts of criticisms were made of London of different things. For instance, the appalling mess that was made by G4S, the security firm, and having to bring in the army before the Games. And, you know, it's the job of the newspapers, in Britain anyway, to suspect that they're being told lies the whole time and to make certain that they're confronting.
Go ahead, Lee.
They're confronting the authorities.
It's not just that it goes with the...
And not necessarily taken what is being told.
But goes with the territory makes it sound like it's just...
Go ahead, Lee.
But it goes with the territory makes it sound like this is exactly what happens every time, and I don't believe it is. I mean, it was a concerted effort to talk about almost nothing but the anti-gay, issue. Which don't get me wrong, I think all anti-gay laws are terrible. But at the same time, at least in the U.S. corporate media, it was like all they're talking about. It was all they're talking. And this is only a few years after these anchors are allowed to come out as gay. I mean, this is only a few years beyond. Some of the states in the U.S. have horrible anti-gay laws. And Fox News was really in an interesting bind because they both wanted to hate on Russia, and yet they're anti-gay, largely. So they really wanted to hate on Russia, but they didn't bring up the anti-gay stuff because they themselves have an issue with that. So they were in a real bind there.
You know, Lee, if I can stay with you.
Can I just...
Okay, Martin, this is Crosstalk. Jump in. Go ahead, Martin.
I just want to add the fact that I think the main thing that the West has with Russia, and a lot of my friends who are activists in London, is the fact that Russia claims to be the leader. It claims to be now a first world country. It claims to be in the guise in the superpower. It's not an African village. And if they're playing in the big league, they have to play the big league rules. And I think it's ridiculous that they brought this law in, especially when they did. And that's the problem with it. Of course, the attacks happen. Let's talk about and introduce the subject about the Dispatches documentary on Channel 4 that was aired just 2 days before the opening. It was just aired because of ratings, but of course it highlighted the problems and the attacks and the violence that Russia has had and will continue to have. But they have that in every other country at the same time. But that said, Russia does need to move forward on the matter, and this really, in some people's opinions, put a cloud over the whole Games.
Okay, I don't think it has. I think it's actually backfired. I think people, as I think almost all of us agreeing, are enjoying the sport here. John, again, I mean, I'm very to have you on the program because you have a good perspective here. You know, we've talked about the criticisms, but when there were criticisms of Atlanta, it came from the United States primarily. When there was criticism in London, it was the British that were criticizing it. I see an international campaign to denigrate the Games here in Russia. I would agree with you. Yes, in the last few days, it's tapered off a little bit because the campaign is over until they're looking for something else to criticize, okay? But it seems to me that, again, Sochi is different because it was an international campaign. But before, when it was the host country, it was the host country criticizing itself.
Well, I mean, as I pointed out to you right at the beginning, you've only got to go back to 1968 and you've got to see the number of people who were killed in Mexico City in a demonstration in 1968 and the huge furore there was internationally about that against Mexico, against the repression in Mexico City. There is one absolute shining example of something which was highlighted by the international media against the host city. And, you know, there were criticisms of Moscow during the 1980 Olympics, just as there were criticisms of the way that the 1984 Olympics were staged, the money at all costs attitude, as it was, in fact, in Atlanta in 1996. When there were criticisms then. And of course, you know, there was a very minor terrorist incident then in 1996 in Centennial Park. I think, you know, I think you're being unduly sensitive about this. I really do. I don't believe that the international media have targeted Sochi any more than they would have done any other city in the past, and I think at the moment, you know, there's hardly anything in the British media at all about gay rights at all.
Well,
what they are concerned about
I find it very interesting. If I can go to Lee, there are 8 states in the United States that have laws that are almost identical, and I would even say the laws in Russia were cut and paste from American laws and translated into Russian and put into effect. No, I'm dead serious. It's no joke here. And you know, and we still get this hypocritical criticism is that your laws are bad, but don't talk about our laws at all, okay? I mean, you don't want to be gay in Alabama, okay? You don't want to be gay in Utah, okay? But, you know, God forbid you are in Sochi. I just can't fathom that. It's just such a double standard.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that the disagreement here is that John has been not watching maybe Fox News and the U.S. media as much as he has the British media. There might be a difference there because, you know, Fox News, they've learned one really important trick, which is if you repeat something over and over again, people start to believe it. And if you repeat something over and over again, people start to believe it. And that's what they've realized, and so they just kept pounding away at the problems in Sochi, which in a way I have honestly never really seen before. So I think maybe there's a difference here from over in England. But yeah, the anti-gay thing, if people in Russia want to be upset with that, which they should be, I think that's fine. But it's different when you're coming from the U.S., a place where there are hate crimes going on all the time. I mean, there is hatred. An NFL player just came out as gay, and the hatred against him is tremendous. So to then stand up and say, oh, look at what they're doing, it's bogus.